We've got, and this is quite nice to say, a ton of Star Wars news to discuss today. Most of this video will cover some leaks regarding the upcoming Starfighter film and kind of the state of the Star Wars sequel trilogy era, in my opinion. And I'll break this video up into sections, but before we get there, I do just want to round up a few other things. First of all, we did get a trailer for Star Wars Visions Volume 3. It looks excellent. Honestly, of all the streaming-only non-canon editions Disney has made for both Star Wars and Marvel, Visions has to be the best. It's better than the Marvel What Ifs or zombie shows. A lot of these shorts end up feeling like legitimate pieces of art made by people who love the universe, which is just so cool. Anyway, we knew this already, but Volume 3 will also have sequels to the Volume 1 shorts, The Duel, The Village Bride, and The Ninth Jedi, which I think for most people were massive standouts. I'm happy that they're returning to the Japanese anime format. I just really enjoyed the shorts of Volume 1 more than the global effort for the follow-up, and Volume 3 just looks spectacular. We do need, at some point though, a massive space battle anime. And as great as Visions has been, and to be honest, I have very few complaints, there's even more potential for this part of Star Wars. I would like to see some of these stories made into even bigger things. That's already happened somewhat. For example, The Duel was expanded into what I thought was a really, really excellent novel, The Ronin, set sort of in the Star Wars universe, in a Star Wars-like universe at least, but non-canon to everything else. There are just so many avenues for more creative storytelling that I'd really like to see explored, I guess is the short at what I'm getting at here. And for those wondering, the follow-up to The Duel in Visions Volume 3 will not be telling the same story as The Ronin. Nonetheless, and this is part of the point, regardless of whether there's a greater continuity or overall interconnected plot, a story being good in and of itself is worthwhile. And that's why The Ronin is made no worse by the follow-up in anime form by the original creators, and why these non-canon stories generally are still just so cool, especially when crafted as artfully as they have been. You know, the older I've gotten, the less I've cared about continuity, especially when prior mistakes in something like a comic or a book get in the way of the best story possible, or vice versa. I'd prefer if people could tell stories which are great or which are fun to play, if it's a video game, for example, in universe, without every time at least having to stick perfectly to canon, and that's how we get things like The Force Unleashed. I'll come back to that, but the other piece of news I want to talk about before getting into Starfighter is that we've gotten a bit of Ahsoka news. For one, a bunch of people in the media were flown out to the set for the show, and they posted a little bit, but presumably there's some embargo, which, when passed, will give us some insight into Season 2. But we also learned today that probably my favorite Star Wars television director, Bryce Dallas Howard, will be directing 2 episodes of Ahsoka Season 2, which for me is great. I think she's done really well on the small screen, and honestly, they should use her whenever they can. She really gets Star Wars. It's interesting. Star Wars is clearly moving away from the small screen. So what will be done with all these professionals, especially directors who have been cutting their teeth on streaming shows? Bryce Dallas Howard is the one I'm most interested in. Will she eventually get a movie? Will Star Wars return to streaming someday, and will she get more work there? I don't know. Either way, that's the news there. Last detail, Disney Plus is now adding some creator-made content to their platform, which seems like a weird idea, but we need to start a fan effort to get being racist about Star Wars aliens for over 8 minutes onto the platform. Millions must see it. All right, moving on to the main thing here. We've had some leaks about Star Wars Starfighter. I'll warn you guys now, but to be honest, if these turn out to be true, it's something we'll learn really early on in the film, so I personally would keep watching. I always like to give you the choice, however. Anyway, I heard this first on John Rocca's show, but others were discussing it on Twitter as well. The rumor is that Star Wars Starfighter is centered around Ryan Gosling protecting Amy Adams' child who is force sensitive and taking them to safety. Josh from Den of Nerds added on to this, saying he'd heard and was unhappy to report that he was taking the force sensitive kid to Rey. He disliked that rumor. I actually like it quite a bit. And here's where I want to tie into one of my earlier discussions. I think Starfighter and really any film or project that comes out in this era is going to be somewhat hampered by a few really poorly done stories in the sequel trilogy era. There's a lot which has been developed in the new expanded universe outside of the 3 sequel films, which really needs to be discarded in my opinion. Primarily, we have several Kylo Ren comic runs which are just not very good. We have the Rise of Skywalker novelization, and I guess I want to be precise. They're not necessarily bad as a totality, but a lot of them have made really bad lore decisions. I talked a couple of weeks ago about the Knights of Ren and how they've been transformed into this lame sort of motorcycle club where Kylo Ren is like too edgy for them and they don't really care about anything. Poor choices there. I don't like the specific of the Luke Jedi Temple massacre, nor the very limited details about his new order. And I also don't like the fact that Rey being a granddaughter of Palpatine is basically thrown out the window, where she's not actually his biological granddaughter, rather she's the offspring of one of his failed clones. It's just like, keep it normal. Let Palpatine lay pipe. I might need to put that on a shirt. Have her be his biological granddaughter. It was just made way too complex and stupid, and that was in the Rise of Skywalker novelization and also Shadows of the Sith, which was a fine book, I suppose, in and of itself. Also, her dad's name is Dathan. I don't like that. So back to Amy Adams, I think it's important to discard a lot of this bad lore because I don't want everything Luke did to be completely thrown away. All his students killed everything else as implied by the comic. I would like Amy Adams, for example, to be a Jedi of that order. Now listen, I of course thought this when I saw Amy Adams because she's a red-haired actress being cast in a Star Wars film, but while I don't think this is the case, it is kind of lining up better than I would have expected. This Reddit comment pointed out Amy Adams is 51, Luke Skywalker was 53 when he died in The Last Jedi, Lynn Gray is 14, hear me out, Amy Adams is Mara Jade, that kid is Luke's son. I was shocked that the timeline actually worked because Luke looks older than 53, partially because Mark Hamill was nearly 70 in The Force Awakens. Amy Adams looks young, but she's actually 51, so the age gap between the characters could be relatively minor, so it's possible. I don't even think I would mind it at this point. You can make up a million ways for why Luke wasn't aware of his offspring. Maybe Amy Adams purposely hid it from him. I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen, but who knows at this point? The universe is really just open to anything. But yeah, my point is, I don't want these comics, I don't want these novels to get in the way of what could be a better story. If Star Wars, the writers and directors of these movies, have an idea for something that will work really well for the universe or will make an interesting story, even if it conflicts with pre-existing lore in comics or books, we're at the point where we need to just go with it. And this is especially true for me where so far the expanded universe content of the new EU has really just been additions or explanations of things that happen in the movie. Now, that's not a rule. There have been good stories which work independently of the source material, like Alphabet Squadron or Lost Stars, for instance, and I would actually dislike more for them to get in the way of those things which stand on their own than when they overwrite what is essentially an explanation for something that occurred in the movies. Does that make sense? Like, if you're going out there and telling a story, I think that should be respected a bit more than just explaining something which already exists, but either way, the realities of economic scale in terms of films versus expanded universe content like books always says that the films and what's best for them is going to be what comes first. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think about the leaks and all the news we discussed today. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.